All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. These webinars are intended for educational purposes only. So while we hope that you learn new information, the trainers presenting these webinars are not attorneys. Therefore, all information provided during the presentation and the Q&A session should not be construed as legal advice. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brianna Grimes, and welcome to our webinar about I-9 compliance and best practices presented to you by PayEntry. I'm going to be your training facilitator today, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you. Now, today we're going to be talking about what is an I-9 form, how to complete an I-9 form, what is EVerify, the new I-9 form changes in 2020, and how to stay compliant with the law. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start by breaking this down and answering the question, what is the I-9 form? Some of you may never have stopped to think about it, even though I'm sure you've filled out quite a few of these forms. Now, the I-9 form verifies the identity and employment authorization of individuals hired for employment in the United States, and it is required by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Division, or USCIS, in the government. In order to be compliant with this requirement, all United States employers must properly complete the form, and it must be completed for each individual hired for employment. This includes both citizens and non-citizens. Both the employee and the employer must complete their portions of the I-9 form for it to be considered completed. The employee will attest to their employment authorization by filling out their portions of the form and signing it. They must also provide the appropriate documentation from the acceptable documents list found on the last page of the form. Then the employer representative will examine the eligibility stated on the I-9 form along with the documents and determine if they appear reasonably genuine. If the employer makes the distinction that they are genuine, then they will record the document information in the appropriate places on the form. An employer must retain the I-9 document for 3 years from the date of hire or 1 year after their termination, whichever is later. Now remember that the I-9 form has to be maintained throughout the entirety of their employment. So this rule comes into play when someone is no longer with the organization. For example, if an employee was hired on February 9th of 2014 and they were terminated on June 4th of 2015, then the I-9 would need to be kept until February 9th of 2017, which is 3 years after the date of hire. This date is later than the June 4th of 2016 date, which is 1 year after their termination date. So whichever of the two is longer is how long you must keep the I-9 once the employee is no longer with the company. Now, with more people working remote than ever before, and it being a safety hazard to bring people into the office to fill out paperwork, how can you do the I-9 paperwork remotely? Well, as of right now, there is a program called EVerify, and it is a web-based system that allows enrolled employers to confirm the eligibility for their employees to work in the U.S. digitally. Now, keep in mind that this does not replace the I-9 process. This is an added step to help you verify their eligibility of employment while the pandemic is going on and while people are not able to come in and verify the documents right away. Now, this process works, and it starts with employers like yourselves enrolling in the service online. Then your new hire's identity and employment eligibility information from the I-9 is electronically matched and verified against records available to the Social Security Administration and the Department of Homeland Security. Employees can upload their documents to the portal, and it is digitally verified via that portal against the databases that are available to make sure that all the information is accurate according to the governmental databases that they have. So this program is completely voluntary unless you do business in a state that has legislation mandating your participation in EVerify, or if there has been some type of legal ruling that mandates it. So be sure to check your local state laws to ensure that you are compliant. Many of you may already know, but it is always good to touch on these types of changes. The I-9 form got a little bit of an update effective January 31st of 2020 earlier this year. Now, it was a mandatory change, meaning that the employers had to begin using this new form, and everyone should have adopted this form 100% by April 30th of this year. If you have not done so already, be sure to double check and make sure that your I-9 forms have the 10/21/2019 version date on them. Otherwise, you may be out of compliance. So the I-9 form changed, but what exactly changed? Well, luckily it was nothing super major or, a whole new look, but the changes that needed to be put in place were there, and they were just slight changes, so we'll go over those. So the first one is that the new form clarifies who exactly can act as an authorized representative on behalf of an employer. It updated the USCIS website addresses. It provides clarification on acceptable documents for the I-9 form. It updated the process for requesting paper forms, and it updated the DHS privacy notice. Now, in addition to the new form that was published in the beginning of 2020, in March of 2020, ICE actually made an announcement that due to COVID-19, they would be deferring physical presence requirements to present employment authorization documents until employees were cleared to return to work. Now, upon an employee's physical return, the employee has 3 business days to present the documents for the employer to physically inspect. So in addition, the employer would need to update the section either 2 or 3 with additional information field of the I-9, and they'll need to write in word for word documents physically examined and then the date that you would examine them. This section will depend on whether it's 2 or 3 will depend on exactly what documents the employee provides. But in both sections 2 and 3, there is a field marked additional information, and that is where you will fill out that specific information. An update on this was recently released, and even though phased openings have begun in different states, ICE will continue to honor the extension of this extension to the deferment of physical presence until further notice. So at this time, they have not put an end date on the deferment, but only state that they will monitor the ongoing national emergency and provide an update as needed. So we will be looking for that if and when they decide that the extension of this has come to an end. Now, with this extension, if your employees are able to return and the original documents that they provided digitally are lost, expired, or unavailable, the employee will need to fill out a new I-9 and present new valid documents. You'll use the same hire date as their remote hire date, and then attach this new I-9 to the original I-9 that was accepted at the time of hire. Now, on this new I-9, again, in that additional information field, you'll just need to put a note that the original documents were unavailable. All right, so we've covered what an I-9 is, how 2020 has made changes, and responsibilities that employers have regarding I-9s. Now let's go over a basic list of compliance tips for I-9s that can help you ensure that your files are compliant with the law. Be sure that when you are storing them, you are not putting the completed I-9s in the employee's personnel files. They need to be kept separate in order to protect against discrimination. If you're still doing paper I-9s, which is completely fine, and you don't have EVerify as a step, don't accept photocopied documents for Section 2. If you're still having physical documents brought into your office, or you're still having the physical documents brought in, but you are storing everything digitally, just make sure that you do verify and double check the real documents before you decide to store your I-9s digitally. Make sure that employees complete their portion of the I-9 and bring in the documents on or before the first day of paid employment. The employer technically has up to 3 days to complete their portion on page 2, but if you knock it all out on the same day, then you will ensure that you're compliant. Also, make sure that you're not discriminating based on the employee's answer to question 4 on page 1. If their work authorization is expiring in the future or soon, you cannot use that as a reason to rescind your offer. In addition, be sure that you are following up on their reauthorization dates to ensure that you are compliant while they work for you. Also, the employee can bring whatever documents from the list that they choose. You cannot demand specific documents. And even if your employee speaks only Spanish, the Spanish version of the I-9 form is reserved for employers and employees in Puerto Rico only. A lot of people do not know this and they get tripped up on this, especially during audits. Spanish-speaking employees and employers in the 50 states of the United States and territories may print the Spanish version for reference, but the employee must fill out the English version of the I-9 in order to be compliant. It is also best practice to audit your I-9 files annually to ensure that you have properly destroyed any files that are outside of their time limit and to ensure that all files have been filled out appropriately. All right, well, that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and got some really good nuggets of information. Remember that if you are one of PayEntry's payroll clients, you are also HR Services Basic members, which means that you have access to Kathy and I for any questions that will help you with an audit or compliance questions. So before we end for today, let me see if we have any questions at this time. So it looks like we have a few. Does EVerify replace my need for a physical I-9 document? No, EVerify does not replace the need for a physical I-9 document. It simply just verifies the employment eligibility based on the information provided by the employee, and it just adds an extra step, but it doesn't replace any of the I-9 steps. Do I need to fill out an I-9 form for independent contractors? No, you do not have to fill out an I-9 form for independent contractors because they are not employees. How do I maintain my I-9 digitally? Well, there are many guidelines surrounding how to store I-9 forms digitally and exactly what the USCIS requires if you're looking into moving away from paper. The USCIS website is a great resource because there's really a lot of stipulations around storing them digitally. So I would recommend going to their website. They have a handbook for employers and there is a section for Form I-9 and storage systems. I can include the link in the email that we're going to send out or the FAQs that we're going to send out, but that is definitely a good point of reference for you. Another question, if ICE audits my I-9 files, what can I expect? Are they going to find me right away or will they issue a warning? All right, so the audit process can take as little as 2 weeks up to 3 years for the audit to be completed. Once the review is complete, ICE will issue the fines, penalties, or a warning, and it really depends on the severity of the compliance issues. If you've been audited before, have you had compliance issues before? Unfortunately, it kind of just depends on who's auditing you and kind of your history with them. So unfortunately, there's really not a clear-cut answer to that, but that's kind of basically what you can expect. Is they're going to come in, they're going to audit, and then they'll issue you kind of what their findings were. All right, I think that's all the questions that we had today. So thank you guys so much for your time today. I hope you learned a lot of great information from today's presentation. We will see you again next week to talk about how companies are helping working parents during COVID-19. Also, just a quick announcement for y'all. Starting every Tuesday in December, we are going to actually be replacing our weekly webinars on Thursday with Tuesday webinars, and we are going to start a 2021 state law update mini-series where we're going to be kind of going over the laws that are coming into play starting in 2021 for each of the states. So go ahead and go onto our website under upcoming webinars and find the mini-series date that has your state included, and we'll go over any laws that are going to be effective starting 2021, as well as any laws that may have been voted into your state based on this most recent election. So if there are any that's going to affect your workplace, we will also talk about that as well. So we look forward to seeing you guys there. Have a great rest of your week.